Probando 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Probando 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Probando, probando.
Give me the clue, please.
Now.
Hello, my name is Iker Zubizarreta. I am CFO at Fondo Latinoamericano de Reservas, FLAR. This session will be conducted in English. I will be now making a brief announcement in Spanish. La sesión va a ser en inglés. Tenemos traducción al español. Si desean esa opción, seleccionenla en Zoom. Para asistencia, usen la herramienta de chat y con gusto los atenderemos. Welcome to this sixth edition of our Cartagena Talks. In these times in which we unfortunately cannot meet in person, this is a space especially created to foster the communication and collaboration within the official institutions of our region. We are very grateful that you were able to once again make time to accompany us. We hope that you're safe, effective, and in good spirits, both in your organizations as well as in your personal lives. This session is being recorded and will be available for replay. Please ask your questions in the chat tool in Zoom, and Marcelo will be asking them to Frank. Please do so as early as you can in order to have better chances to have your question asked to the speaker. And please include your name and institution. For those of you that have been with us since April, accompanying us in these calls, you may recall that in our first encounter, we visited China and Asia. In our second session, we spent time in Europe. In our third meeting, we took a closer look at the US. In the fourth session, we spent time in Latin America. In the fifth conference, we took a long-term look at the global perspectives. And in this occasion, our sixth encounter, we have a long-time collaborator of our Cartagena talks. In the midst of the already very challenging economic, health, political, geopolitical, and social environment that we're going through, we brace for what seems to be an even more complex planet in the horizon for the next several months. Well, nobody has seen it all, but if anybody has ever been close to, I believe that our guest today will be one of those people. In that spirit, I know that Frank will help us gain a broad perspective and make sense of a very fluid situation where every day it seems like the ground is moving beneath our feet. Our host today for this sixth edition of our Cartagena Talks is Marcelo Martinelli. Marcelo is a senior advisor at the Foreign Reserve Department at the Central Bank of Brazil. He joined the Central Bank in 2003 and has been working in the FX management in various functions in the front and middle offices ever since. He holds a degree in economics from the University of Sao Paulo. We are very delighted and grateful to Marcelo and to the Central Bank of Brazil for their support to this initiative that aims to keep us connected and to foster open collaboration in the region, Latin America. I am very much looking forward to this session. Without any further ado, I leave you with Marcelo. Marcelo, many thanks for accompanying us today. The room is all yours.
Thank you very much, Iker. Thank you very much for inviting me to host this session. It's going to be an honor to do so in a subject that it's very common for us in Latin America, especially to face heightened volatility around elections. It's not so much the case for the US, but it is where we are now. So it is. Before I pass the floor to Frank, I'll make a brief introduction about him to everybody here, and we can get started on the discussion, because I'm pretty sure we're going to be running out of time soon, given how much ground we have to cover here. So Frank Kelly, he is the Deutsche Bank's head of government and public affairs for North America and Latin America. He manages and coordinates relationships with elected officials and political and legislative bodies globally. And prior to joining Deutsche Bank, Frank held senior executive positions at both Charles Schwab and Merrill Lynch. He also held positions in the official sector prior to joining the private sector, where he has worked before in the Securities Exchange Commission as chief spokesman, and also at the Department of Justice and as assistant to the Director for Policy Development, where he focused on international matters, including terrorism and war crimes. And prior to these posts, he served in the George H.W. Bush and the Ronald Reagan White Houses, where he started as a writer for President Reagan. He's also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and the International Institute for Strategic Studies. He serves as a member of the board of directors of the Atlantic Council of the United States, the American Council on Germany, and the Jerome Lejeune Foundation. So you've been around, Frank. We can say.
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
Yes. That's a very wonderful way of saying I've gotten quite old.
Well, I remember all those administrations as well. So I think we have gotten old at the same time. So and it's my pleasure to have this conversation with you today and to share that with my fellow central bankers and reserve managers as well. And if you want to do some opening remarks, the floor is yours, and we can pick it up as we go along.
Thank you, Marcelo and Iker, and thank you everybody for joining today and giving me the honor of speaking to you again. I so wish I was in Cartagena at this moment, more than you could ever know, with the political madness, chaos, and fear that is going on up here. Marcelo, I'm glad to see you're at the White House and not me with that backdrop. So to really get to what's going on here and give you sort of an overview. First, let me just start with something that's certainly very timely and market specific. There's a tremendous focus on what the US Congress and the president may do on stimulus to get the US economy going again. To be quite blunt, I think that there is no more than a 5% chance that we see any new economic stimulus legislation being presented and passed between now and the November 3rd elections. It's for a multitude of reasons. I'm happy to answer questions to that. Very complicated politics and very, very ugly politics. Marcelo knows I'm a 5th generation Washingtonian and a 3rd generation who has been involved in politics, campaigns, Congress. I've never seen anything remotely like the situation we're in now in terms of ugliness, emotion, and fear. A lot of that, of course, injected by COVID, and as the fear of it coming back in a terrible way. So I wouldn't expect anything until after the election, and even after the election, come late November, December, before the new administration, whoever may get elected, I still think there's very low odds of them getting something done there. Marcelo has talked about just how exciting, and it seems every week, almost every day, the scenario changes, and Iker talked about it as well. It's the ground, it's just like the perpetual earthquake here. Where are we and what to expect? So we're about 40 days away from the election, November 3rd. It is going to be brutal. It's going to be ugly in the press. There's a lot of fear, a lot of concern, a lot of anger. First, I think one thing that the market needs to prepare for and the world needs to prepare for, I think there's a very high likelihood that we do not actually know the final outcome of the presidential election, key Senate races, and a number of House races for weeks after November 3rd. The reason is because of COVID and has driven us to have to do mail-in voting, which is something that we don't do here on a large scale at all. It's a very minor thing. The reasons for this are, one, our postal service is overstretched. They work on a skeletal crew because of COVID, and because we're all sitting at home, we're sitting there in front of Amazon and every other online vendor buying stuff, and the US Postal Service is overwhelmed delivering those parcels to us. They are a major contractor to Amazon and others. In fact, when Marcelo and I were doing a test run the other day, I sat here, and during the course of the day, there were 4 deliveries to my home. 3 of them were, all 4 of them were Amazon packages, 3 of them delivered by the US Postal Service. This is what they're doing to make money, to keep it going, because they've never gotten appropriate funding from Congress. So I think the market needs to be really prepared for that you could get well into December before we know who the actual victor is, because there'll be tremendous lawsuits coming with this, a flood of them, just a tidal wave of them, because in every state, which every state does the elections, they handle the elections differently. There's different rules. And as they we're rolling into the election, we're seeing states like Pennsylvania. 2 days ago, for example, the Supreme Court of the state of Pennsylvania ruled that, I've never seen anything like this before, Election day is November 3rd. They're going to allow voting to continue until November 7th. So immediately we've got 4 extra days of voting in this major battleground state, in which the entire election could pivot on. They'll be still voting 4 days after. Now that case is now going to the U.S. Supreme Court, our federal Supreme Court, to decide whether that's legal. We're seeing now already over 200 lawsuits have been filed on how the election is going to be run and how ballots are counted and how much time they have, et cetera. So we expect a flood of that post-election, challenging fraud and that irregularities, et cetera, which goes to, you can imagine, in a very polarized American electorate at this point, you're looking at both sides pointing at the other of trying to cheat to get the other side winning. We've seen social protests on the streets, certainly even last night, because of social issues, racial issues. This now can become very political, with both sides accusing each other of cheating. And the risk is that you see very frustrated people, particularly frustrated because they've been sitting in their homes for 6 months because of COVID. This all can spill over. This is a grave concern right now, of which authorities are trying to figure out how to deal with this, anticipating it as well. Turning to the elections, it completely was upended this past week by the death of one of our Supreme Court justices, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Supreme Court has become an intensely political place. Not that the judges are political, they have ideological leanings, but who's more conservative, who has the majority, and so much of our legislation ends up being litigated in front of the Supreme Court. Is this legal or not? So we now have a new opening, and President Trump will nominate somebody on Saturday, announce this. The reason why Saturday, not a normal course of business, is because Justice Ginsburg is being buried late Friday. So out of respect to her, he'll wait, but he won't wait until Monday. He's going to announce it on Saturday. This will lead to intense congressional hearings and a confirmation vote that we expect before the November election. But this becomes an enormous new flashpoint battlefront, very emotional, as they always are, Supreme Court justices. We saw it the last time as well. So that plays into this in a huge way. At the moment, I would say the presidential race is very close, perhaps much closer than the polls are showing. One of the issues that we're seeing is that there's something we call the shy voter. Shy voter are people who, when pollsters come to them and ask, are you going to vote for Trump or Biden? They say, oh, I'm going to vote for Biden, of course. But in reality, they plan on voting for Trump. They're too embarrassed to say they're going to vote for Trump. They're not telling their spouses, their children, their coworkers, and they're certainly not going to tell a pollster, yeah, I really like his economic policies. Yeah, I know the things he says is terrible and he seems crazy or whatever, but they still intend to vote for him. Bloomberg News has done in-depth studies of this and has come up with that there could be at least a 5% differential in the polls that for Trump that was not showing up in current polls. Already, we're at a tie in Pennsylvania. We're at a tie in Florida. Biden is up to some degree, 4 or 5 points in Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin. But again, we think this is going to be close. I think if you ask me today who's going to win, I think Biden wins, but by a very small majority. And then, of course, the Supreme Court being the nomination and confirmation is done by our U.S. Senate, which is the second big battleground here and really goes to the market implications of where we go in 2021. Republicans are in control. Democrats have to win a net 4 seats for control. And there are 5 or 6 Republican senators who are up for re-election who are in serious trouble. This confirmation battle can help them because it rallies voters Republican voters who may be lackadaisical about Trump, because there seemed to be some indication among some of them that they will support these Republican senators who are going to help put in what is almost assuredly a very conservative new justice to the Supreme Court. So this has huge ramifications and has shifted everything very quickly in a big way. We expect the Supreme Court nominee will be confirmed by the November 3rd election, meaning she, because Trump has said he will nominate a woman, and there's two candidates right now. One of them, Barbara LaGoya, who I believe he's interviewing personally tomorrow, is a first-generation Cuban American. Her parents were persecuted by Castro. They moved to Florida. So she would be the first Latina justice on the US Supreme Court, which could be very appealing to Trump and Republicans because it helps reach out to this enormous Latino voter base here in the United States. Everybody's ignored them, to be honest, through the whole Black Lives Matter uprisings we've seen, and which is sort of shocking to me. I've never quite understood it, because if anybody's getting discriminated against in this country, in many ways, it's the Latino community, as they become more and more successful here and become the largest minority in this country. And quite frankly, and I think in 20 or 30 years, probably will be the majority of this country. Anyway, so it's be very interesting to see how that plays out. The question is, what happens next year, and what are the implications policy-wise if Biden wins and Democrats win control of the Senate? I think you could see some huge policy fiscal shifts here like we've never seen in this country, maybe even in the last 90 years since Franklin Roosevelt during the Depression and his New Deal. Very quick tease, if I can, maybe we'll talk about this in the questions, but we expect Biden to move on a very large infrastructure package that will be very green in its orientation, renewable energy. He will sign on day one the Paris Climate Accord. He has stated he wants the United States to be emissions neutral by 2030. That's very ambitious. 9 years from now, we're emissions neutral. That will require an enormous amount of new legislation and regulation to get corporate America in line and on track to meet a 2030 goal. Broadband will be an enormous issue. Technology will be an enormous issue. The expansion of broadband, because it's become a global competitiveness issue, right? In many ways, America, and particularly American policymakers, were shocked at how Huawei has dominated the broadband with 5G. I compare it to the Sputnik moment, which we remember in the 60s, where the Russians were the first ones to put a spaceship in outer space, beating the United States. Wait, what? The communists beat us at this? And now we have the Chinese on 5G. Why do we have not something to offer competitively? We have to do this. We're being overtaken competitively in the marketplace. So I would expect a lot of that to happen very quickly in a Biden administration, and particularly if they win control of the Senate. I don't expect any change. We can get into this in questions. Strategically, Biden and Trump, interestingly enough, are directly in line with each other on China policy. The difference will be not so much strategic, but tactically. What does Biden do? He rejoins the Trans-Pacific Partnership. He reinvigorates it. He looks to more military alliances, multinational military alliances in Asia Pacific, and I would argue even Latin America, to pull most of Latin America further in a more integrated way in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Also, India, much greater, deeper relationship between the United States and India. Remember, Kamala Harris, his vice presidential nominee, is half Indian. Her mother is from India. And Trump already launched this in building those relationships. This also goes, I think, very much to supply chains and seeing the massive shift in supply chains. I think you're going to see a great acceleration of that, regardless of who's president. But Biden will have a much more strategic, predictable way of doing it, but looking to pull out as rapidly as possible, forcing those supply chains out of China to India, to the APAC countries, but also increasingly to the hemisphere, right? And that the renegotiated NAFTA, the USMCA, that bring them to Mexico. Why are we not encouraging these production capabilities? Brazil, Colombia, Peru, Chile. The Trump administration, interestingly enough, very quietly is pushing very hard for that to happen now. They're pushing US corporates to do this. Get out of China. Go to India. Go to these other countries where there is democracy and the rule of law, because they are looking at, and as we are seeing, China is aggressively moving away from what we were expecting to do in terms of more open markets, the Hong Kong situation, the Uyghur situation. These are all very ominous. And I think the supply chain issue will be a big issue. So we're in for huge changes one way or the other, and much bigger ones, particularly if we see Biden win. I also expect, interestingly enough, Biden, if he does win, much more of an embrace of the hemisphere. One of the leading contenders to be his Secretary of State, for example, is former Senator Christopher Dodd, who chaired the committee that oversaw the choosing and vetting, the background check on his vice presidential candidate, the most sensitive job in his campaign, which was successfully done with the choice of Kamala Harris. Many of you remember, even from the 80s, Dodd was deeply involved in the Central American turmoil, trying to find negotiated settlements in El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua. He speaks fluent Spanish. His brother is a longtime Latin American diplomat, teaches Latin American government and public policy at Georgetown University. So this is going to be a very interesting move, and particularly, and I think I've even mentioned this the last time I was with you, increasingly this is going to be the focus. And immigration and this whole building of a wall, which will go away if Biden is elected, but it does go to show the further focus, and particularly as we see the growth of Latino community here in the United States, we have to embrace it. And politically, you have to, because they're becoming the largest, they are arguably the largest voter bloc in the United States now. There's so much to cover here, and I think that's sort of a top line. But Marcelo, why don't I turn it back to you? Maybe we can chat a bit about this.
Yeah, okay. So one of the things that I wanted to challenge you, before we go into more of eventual scenarios about what may happen after the election, I think we're seeing a lot of the recent events have been one way or the other affecting market expectations around the elections. So we had, with as you well said about the political environment today in DC is very, very charged, to put it mildly, to say the least, regarding the fact that you do have Trump and McConnell trying to substitute an icon for the Democrats in Justice Ginsburg. And given the fact that what happened in 2016 with Scalia's seat, I think that is adding to the tensions surrounding that. With that, as you said, you have an environment of the pandemic, and you also have the racial tensions that's been, that even from yesterday,
Yes.
It has gotten even more heightened with the ruling in Louisville. So if you look at Twitter today, all it's talking about is the ruling yesterday and the implications of that. So to make a long story short, I think that where I'm trying to challenge you is that with all of that, yesterday also President Trump in a press conference said that he's going to think about what's going to happen in the transfer of power. So in an environment that is already charged, he basically threw gasoline on the fire, and that is raising fears of authoritarian state and things like that. Not that I think that that's something that's going to happen, but I think one of the things that you touched on is that the possibility of having some sort of a contested election, as it was in 2000, but not only in Florida, maybe several states, is a real possibility. So I just want to challenge you on that. even though it's a very small likelihood that you have a situation where you have an election that's basically going to be decided by the Supreme Court again, how much that's going to factor into the polls from here until election day? Who do you think is going to be more motivated to vote based on what we're seeing over the last week?
You've laid this out very well. I mean, and first, let me just say, I think the markets, certainly in the US, in talking to market participants, which seems to be what I do all day these days, just in a massive scale like I've never done in my entire career, they're just sort of waking up to the fact that come November 3rd, we could see serious problems, social unrest, because both sides, political parties, are going to be accusing the other of not just cheating, but trying to rip out control, and one accusing the other of destroying democracy. So you're going to have that problem. And that, what does the market do to position itself during that period? And when do they get out? I mean, I had a conversation with the chief investment officer of a very, very large reinsurance company the other day. He sees it now, and he's trying to ascertain, when does he get out of the market and fly to much safer assets, much safer portfolio, and at what point would it be safe to return? And they don't know. And I can't tell you that, and I don't think anybody else would know. But to your question also, both sides seem to be highly motivated, but it's very hard to read at this point because we've already begun voting in this country. Some states are allowing in-person voting. Most states have already begun mail-in ballots. But I would point to something that Pew Research has been consistently pointing out. Bizarrely, there's a 40% differential between Republicans and Democrats as to whether you should wear a face mask in public. Republicans overwhelmingly saying, no, this, it's not that bad. Democrats, this is terrible, you should wear a face mask. What does that matter to this argument? It seems to be very clearly correlating with who's doing a mail-in ballot and who will show up in person, right? So on Sunday, it was revealed that the gentleman who oversees ballot counting in Philadelphia, the city of Philadelphia, he's seeing a 17-1 differential in mail-in ballots for Biden versus Trump. But does that all get wiped away on election day because you see a huge number of Republicans coming out in person and voting? That could happen as well. I don't know. And this is what's even making this even more unpredictable.
Yeah, and add to that, you also have the president telling his people to vote by mail and also vote in public. So it's as you said, I think it's in a situation that's already very, very complicated because of the pandemic. You also have other factors adding to the uncertainty, and to a certain degree, I think markets are reflecting some of that uncertainty. So one of the things that at least I've been seeing from a number of shops is that investors have been putting options positions around the election date, making bets on what's going to happen to volatility around the elections. This is something that's very common in emerging markets. It's something that we've never seen in a developed market like the US. So elections here in Brazil and in other emerging market countries sometimes have those types of factors in play that investors try to take advantage of that. But it's something that we've never seen in the US.
Never.
Yeah. So.
But then again, we've never had a president of the United States, when asked on live television, will you promise us an orderly transition if you lose? And he said, we'll see, suggesting you're going to have to carry me out of here kicking and screaming, and I will be defying all of you. I mean, I see zero chance of him launching a coup d'etat, zero, or him, somehow staying in power if he's lost. But he can make it ugly.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that he's probably trying to do is convince people that he's capable of doing it, knowing that he cannot. So it's kind of like it's a con, right? So if you convince people that you're able to pull it off, people are going to get a little bit more concerned about that. But as you said, it's very difficult it's one thing for you to do something like what happened in Florida in 2000, that we're talking about less than 100,000 votes in those days, right? So, which is, it's one isolated event. He's basically talking about mail-in votes all over the US. So it's a much bigger
Much
issue,
bigger.
especially now in the pandemic, where you're going to have a lot more. He is going to be voting by mail, so
Right.
Trump himself is going to be voting by mail, so it's something that's going to be more widespread. But as you said, I think one of the things that it's getting people's attention is that you're going to have more Biden supporters voting by mail than you're going to have Republicans voting by mail. So,
Yes.
yeah. One other thing that I wanted to discuss with you, Frank, is one of the things that I've been hearing as well is if Biden win and they manage to flip the Senate, you do have some fiscal policy repercussions that you already discussed in your opening remarks, that you're probably going to have more spending and corporate taxes are going to be raised and so forth. These are things that we already know, given the what Biden has already said in his economic plan and so forth. But you also have the reaction from the Democrats, given what happened, especially in the Supreme Court. So some of the people that I've spoken to say that it's almost a given that the number of Supreme Court justices are going to be increased in that case. Do you think that is something that they are actually thinking about doing? And what's going to be the reaction on the Republican side?
There's tremendous pressure to do it, and a couple other things which I'll touch on as well that they're contemplating. But yes, there's tremendous pressure within the Democratic Party to add 3 new justices, which would be the center left in their viewpoints. Now, we call it packing the court. The danger to that is this has happened one other time where there was an attempt to do this, and President Franklin Roosevelt in the 1930s tried to do it because he got so frustrated with the Supreme Court, and he failed badly. But if you do it this time, one thing that the Democrats get control of the Senate, they want to get rid of our filibuster rule that would require 2/3 of the 100 senators to approve. If they do that, that means by a simple 51 vote majority, they could add 3 new Supreme Court justices and get them on there very quickly. But the risk is if Republicans when at some point invariably they regain control of the Senate, okay, we're going to add 4 more. And suddenly the US Supreme Court looks like a crowded bus or something. I mean, it's just how many Supreme Court justices we have, and it will significantly damage the integrity of our legal system. Biden has been interested, his true expertise in the US Senate was he chaired the Judiciary Committee in the Senate, and he presided over 8, 9 Supreme Court justices being confirmed. And he understands deeply the risk here. He has not committed to doing that, though he'll be pushed by his Senate. And I would point out, if Democrats win control, and I think it's very important from a market perspective to understand, Democrats win control of the Senate, this will not be a centrist Senate. It will be much more progressive left, with our senators Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren in leadership positions, driving a much more left-wing agenda, something that I think sets up for fiscal policy for a President Biden serious clashes, right? I mean, for simple example, he wants to raise the corporate tax rate to 28% from the current 20%. Well, he'll propose that, but the legislation is written by Congress. He can't write it. He can only veto it or sign it into law. He will propose 28% and watch for this more progressive Democratic Party say, thank you, Mr. President, we'd rather have it 34%. And we're going to write it that way, right? So he's going to have to negotiate, barter, and fight with his own party, his own left wing, on a lot of these proposals. Supreme Court could be one. One other thing that's floating around that Democrats, they're so frustrated with Republicans at this point, is granting statehood to Puerto Rico as well as to Washington, D.C. So that Democrats, because both Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. are predominantly Democrat, they're allowed to vote, but they don't have senators or congressmen. That would be 4 new Democratic senators for the foreseeable future, making it that much harder for Republicans to regain control of the Senate. If these things come up, these will be enormous problems and incredibly divisive in this country, I would predict, next year.
Yeah, I see a future where we have a Northeast Dakota, Southwest Dakota, or something like that in the future, right? So I think one of the things that people are discussing about packing the courts and also increasing the number of states is exactly that, you know. So an action, once you have Republicans in the future regain power, they can react on the other direction, right? So that's one of the things that that may put some restraint on the reaction. But I think the packing of the courts is something that a lot of the people have been telling me that it's basically done if they're able to flip the Senate. But you said one of the things that they're going to have to deal with is the situation regarding the fact that they're going to need to kill the filibuster to do it, and that has a host of other implications. Continue on the Senate confirmation of positions. People haven't been talking about this too much, but people keep forgetting that there are 2 openings at the Federal Reserve Board as well that Trump is trying to people in place. I just wanted to, if you have any new information regarding the 2 openings that are open. There is one of the nominees is highly controversial, even for some of the Republicans. And whether you see those names also being confirmed before the election or before January 20th.
You know, this is, and particularly one of them, Judy Shelton, who is quite a conservative libertarian economist, who has generated a tremendous lot of controversy, not just among Democrats, but among a number of Republicans. And she is quite outspoken. Look, they're running out of time. They've got basically tomorrow's Friday, and then they're gone. And then they could come back in what they call the lame duck, which is a strange name when you think about it, after the election, and they could get that done. And maybe that's when they could do more stimulus. I think if you've got all of this election chaos, they don't come back, right? They don't get anything done. That's one problem. I think Shelton has got very serious problems, and it's going to be very hard for her to get confirmed. Now, the problem is there's another candidate who is much more Main Street and like, but the way this is done, they basically have an agreement that they're tied together. It's either 2 together or none. And I think it's going to be, odds are 60, 70% that you will not see either of them getting confirmed. But one other thing from a market perspective, to be very clear here, and I think we should point this out, I expect no significant shifts. Well, one potential significant shift at the Fed next year if Biden wins. One, Biden very much likes Powell. Powell's a superstar here on both political sides of the aisle. And of course, despite what Trump says, but Republicans in the Senate really like him, and the market likes him, and Biden likes him. And Biden's known him for decades personally, and they get along well. The one shift is I anticipate that the vice chairman for supervision and also head of the FSB, Financial Stability Board, Randy Quarles, will probably step down here in the next 3 to 6 months. He had an agenda of issues that he wanted to work on from a regulatory perspective. He's pretty much wrapped those all up. He's got 1 or 2 more that he's looking, it appears that he'll deal with before the end of the year. But I suspect Quarles will go. And that will be very significant for the financial services sector, because that will be a Democrat, and it will be somebody that we believe that Senator Elizabeth Warren, who is a tremendous foe to the investment, to Wall Street overall, will want a very stern regulator in there to replace. So watch for that. There's one other Fed governor, Lael Brainerd, who is there, and I expect Lael will probably step down. and take a very senior role in a Biden campaign, even potentially a cabinet role. She's been rumored to be Biden's choice to be either the U.S. Trade Representative or to be the Deputy Secretary of Treasury.
Okay. I'm going to start asking some of the questions from the audience, if you don't mind now, Frank. So we have a question from Julia from Ecuador. What future awaits for Latin America and its relations with the United States after the elections? I guess we have two outcomes to talk about for the answer to that question. And what foreign policy and economic policies changes do you expect?
Well, to the first question, I'd point out in 4 years, President Trump, it's best I can remember, has never traveled to Latin America. I don't think he's ever been south of the US border. Vice President Pence has been there. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has been there. In fact, he was just there, Guyana, several other countries.
He was here in Brazil.
And he was in Brazil, yes. And it's fascinating because, of course, President Trump has great affection for President Bolsonaro, right? And he loves the fact that he's referred to, at least up here, as the tropical Trump, right? He sees that very flattering. And of course, he's extended an associate membership. I'm not quite certain what you get out of that, but associate membership in Brazil to be in NATO, et cetera. I think the fact of the matter is, despite all that, if Trump's reelected, because of everything we are seeing with China and the influence of China economically, politically, and now increasingly and rapidly militarily, Trump, if reelected, has to focus much more on hemispheric relationships, bolstering it, and finding a way of boxing out, pushing out China. That's one. If Biden were to be elected, that's absolutely what he would do. As well. If there's one consensus, and as I mentioned a moment ago, there's very little difference between Biden and Trump on the rise of China and how to counter it. And as I would say, it goes all the way down into Congress, right? Bipartisanship. If you want to find bipartisanship on just one issue, it's on China. There are more than 400 pieces of legislation pending. Most of them won't pass, but they'll be reintroduced again next year, pending in this Congress aimed at China. And if the risk of China and their engagement, which the US has ignored throughout the hemisphere, has to be dealt with much more, and the US in a much more strategic fashion, where the US has to offer some sort of counter, at least economically. And I think one way or the other, the hemisphere becomes a major foreign policy focus for whoever's the president next. The big change I would predict is a much deeper, as I said, strategic focus on China by Biden, and where human rights becomes the first or second dominant issue that the US focuses on, because it's the weak spot for China, right? What's happened in Hong Kong? What's happening with the Uyghurs, right? What's happening now, new information coming out and new repressions going on in Tibet, right? So that will be it. The second big one will be a reintegration, refocus, rewarming of the love affair between the US and Europe, rebolstering of NATO. And that is long overdue. Trump, of course, Trump just doesn't like big alliances. He only likes bilateral, and there's a reason for that. But in the wake of what Russia has done in Crimea, and now what Russia is aggressively, carefully, clandestinely doing, basically taking over Belarus, and the risk to the EU and to NATO, to Ukraine in a whole new way, to the Baltic states, I would see Biden really coming after Russia in a hard way, particularly because of Russia's unfettered, seemingly endless efforts to interfere and manipulate our elections, 2016 and now. It's been proven, it's just shocking that they are so open about what they're doing. If Biden's elected, Russia's in for some serious pain.
Yeah, one wonders, right? So it's the natural, I think given what Putin has been doing since 2016, you do want, it's quite clear that he has a horse in this race, right? So and there is an implication. Elections have consequences, as you guys like to say, right? So, and that's going to be felt very deeply by Russia. One of the things about Latin America, I think it's interesting because I think one of the, coming from a Latin American point of view, we are kind of, and talking about Hispanic voters, as you were saying during the beginning, that they're usually taken for granted in the US. Foreign relations towards Latin America in general we kind of have like the same feeling, right? So like Latin Americans are our allies and we don't need to worry about them, which is not quite that simple, right? So it's, I guess we always try to get a hold on what if there is any change on whether policy from the US towards Latin America is going to be changing depending on the change of administration, but that's something that we're always going to have to wait and see what's going to happen, I guess.
I do think there's a big difference though, and let me reiterate it. China forces the United States to be much more focused on and much more engaged in a constructive way with Latin America.
Yeah, in a way, you have a dynamic that it's not the same, but it's kind of similar to the world after the war, right? So in the 50s and 60s, that you had two polar opposites superpowers in the US and the Soviet Union, and you had a kind of a war between them to get more allies, to see who was on their camp, right? So after the 1990s, when the Soviet Union fell, the United States were the sole superpower, and now you have China trying to make a run at the US in that sense. So I think it's getting to the point where if the US start taking everybody for granted, eventually people are going to start looking at China in a different way. And that is something that I think the people in the US are starting to understand, that that's something that they need to address in the future, right? So they cannot be, and Europe is one of the, you said the love affair between the US and Europe. They have to, the US needs to be looking at that relationship as well in the same vein, that you cannot take them for granted anymore. So,
right.
Anyways, I think from a foreign policy point of view, I think this is something that the Latin America story it's probably going to be is an example of what may happen in the future regarding the U.S. relations with the rest of the world.
Yes.
One other question that we got from Flar here is, given that both candidates, to a certain degree, have their source of uncertainty for the markets, with Biden more on the fiscal side and Trump with his trade wars and immigration and so forth, and pick your poison with Trump, we can say. Which of the candidates do you think is more market friendly?
Just in terms of raw commercial purposes of making money, it's Trump, right? Very light touch on regulation. He is, to the markets, they may not like the trade wars, but there's a predictability to him, and he tends to signal to them what he's going to do. And they've come to understand sort of the cadence, the rhythm of Trump on these issues. Biden, I think, is market friendly himself. And he comes from a state that was Delaware, which the markets were critical. Now, most people don't think about tiny little Delaware, but Delaware is home of the Delaware Chancery, where most major Fortune 500 corporations are headquartered. It's where all the large bankruptcy cases are tried out of. It's where all of the major credit card companies are based. He sees that as very important, right? The problem, again, goes back to the issue of this progressive left surge within the Democratic Party of Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, who could care less. Not only could they care less about the financial markets, they see them as evil and need to be much more greatly regulated, right? I mean, they are calling for the breaking up of investment banks again, like we did in the 1930s, physically have to separate commercial and investment banking. That they're calling for, and they've gotten Biden to sign on, for example, to a proposal to create a federal postal bank system. what? Every country that's had one is trying to get rid of them now, right? That we would set this up for the poor, and literally every post office would have a bank in it. So that's a significant shot at smaller banks, at fintech. They don't care. So that's the risk here, is not so much Biden, it's that progressive left that is surging and becoming, will be likely much more powerful in the House of Representatives. And if they win control of the Senate, they'll have that power there as well.
Yeah, it's like it's Biden as a Trojan horse for Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and some of the others, right? So this is something that I hear a lot from people in the market as well, that they fear of an extreme overreaction on economic policy on the other end. And we'll have to wait and see if that happens if the time comes, because I think one of the things we touched on the situation about the courts and increasing the number of states. I guess at a certain point, Biden is gonna need to start picking his fights, right? So he's not gonna be able to do everything that he wants or that they want as well. So even Trump hasn't been able to do everything that he wanted even with the environment that he has now. So it's going to be an interesting after a new administration, new or second term, regardless of the outcome of the election, because there are so many balls in the air that need to be addressed.
But Marcelo, can I also make one point? There are, despite the politics, there are movements on issues here that I compare them to two train tracks. Either one is going to be a bullet train or one's going to be a slow moving freight train. But the issue of ESG and the impact of businesses and climate, right? Where Biden is likely to embrace and force acceleration of legislation, regulation to get companies, like I mentioned earlier, engaged and focused. But we're also seeing, I wouldn't rule that out necessarily for Trump, because it's not that Trump will lead that if he is reelected, but we're seeing corporate America seeing this as a movement, right? So one of the most powerful trade associations here is the Business Roundtable. They represent basically the top 200 businesses in the United States. It's run by the executive director, the president, is George W. Bush's former chief of staff, a very staunch Republican. So, and Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan is the chair. They have seriously embraced the need for climate related legislation, and that businesses and the free market drive this. That's the slow train. So if Trump is reelected, they're just going to keep moving, and he's not going to block that. As long as businesses are happy and they're moving and transforming and innovating that way, great, that's the slow train. But if the Democrats, it's the bullet train.
A good point. We're starting to have to go short in time here. One other thing that I wanted to readdress, that we have some questions here. We already talked about the situation about the mail-in votes and so forth. So that some surveys say that 70% of Biden votes are going to be done by mail. 40% is going to be Trump votes. It's going to be coming by mail. One of the worries that people that one of the questions that arose from that is, what do you think would be the situation if do you think Trump claiming victory early on with just the in presence with the normal votes, and if he does that, what do you think is the effect?
I would expect it, right? I would expect the easiest to count are the in-person votes. So election night, we will probably see results flashing across CNN and every major network in the world. Trump is winning here and maybe Trump is losing there, but he will claim victory. But of course, we still have to count all these mail-in ballots, which are going to take time. And as I expect, and as you and I have talked about, some states like Pennsylvania, they've extended the voting deadline. You can vote for 4 days after the election. So he'll claim victory. The market will react to that, but there'll be immediate confusion because they'll begin to realize the size and scope of the mail-in ballots that have to be counted, and the massive, how broad the litigation will start emerging, right? It'll be like watching a giant cannonade, boom, 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 going everywhere. That will, I think, shock the market, because I don't think they really understand how big that potentially will be. But yes, I would expect him to announce that he won, prove me otherwise, prove me wrong. And that's when things get ugly.
Yeah, that's an understatement. And you know, we're close to wrapping up here. One thing that I wanted to ask you about the polling. I'm pretty sure that I know what your answer is, but I think it's worthwhile having you say this. Do you have any particular pollsters that you watch, or are you more into the models, the model guys, or you just see polling averages as a way for you to see the state of the horse race in this situation?
Well, Marcelo, and thank you for asking, because I hope this is something I can leave behind and help everyone. Look, there's three things that I watch. One, we have a wonderful website. That is a company has run for years called realclearpolitics.com. realclearpolitics.com. And you can go in there and click and look at every poll for governor and senator and president, national and the state by state. And it will show them all in aggregate and give you, and that helps narrow that down a bit. The second thing that we're watching very closely is the labor statistics. Because of COVID and the huge spike in unemployment, what are the unemployment numbers in all the key battleground states? You can find that, strangely enough, which has become a huge new tool for predicting elections, in our Department of Labor's Bureau of Labor Statistics. What's the unemployment rate in Florida? What is it in Pennsylvania? What is it in Wisconsin and Michigan and Ohio? If they're going down over the next month and a half, going into the election, that's a positive for Trump. If they're static or going up, that's a positive for Biden. We're watching that very closely. And the third one, I can't believe that I'm saying this, but the betting odds. What is Las Vegas saying? That has become a huge new indicator that people are watching, which have turned in favor of Trump. People literally putting their money where their mouth is. Now, those are not the best. It's not like people are going and putting in, $1,000. They're doing it in very small increments, so it's not a significant loss for them. But again, it's a third indicator here of what we may be seeing in terms of the outcome for the presidency and for Senate races. Of course, we know human nature as it is. People love to bet on anything.
Yeah, and Vegas hasn't necessarily been. I think they missed the result in 2016 as well. So
yes, they did. Yes, they did.
Yeah.
We all missed it. Hillary Clinton missed it most of all.
Yeah. We're getting close to closing time here. So one of the things that I wanted to just touch briefly on, and maybe we could finish off on this. So basically, we have if we have the one assumption that Republicans are not going to be able to flip the House of Representatives, you basically have three outcomes to in this election. You have a blue wave, you have Biden winning with Republicans controlling the Senate, and you have status quo. Trump is reelected, and Pelosi is still in place, and McConnell is still in place. Given these three scenarios, which ones do you think are the more likely ones, and in what order? If you could.
Right. As of today, I would think the most likely is Biden wins. And I'm going to be a little crazy here because the odds have changed so much with the Supreme Court nomination, and it's going to be so helpful to senators, I think, as I've explained. It's now 50-50 that Republicans hold on control of the Senate, and starting to tilt that they're going to control. So if you press me right now, I would say Biden, Republican Senate, Democratic House, which I think would be quite market friendly. Biden's a tremendous negotiator. And he was in the Senate for 40 years, and he's friends with all of these guys. He's a very friendly guy. and he gets along with everybody, very bipartisan from that perspective, particularly when he's in the Senate, he will negotiate things as he did for Obama when he was vice president. He did want a major tax bill that he did. That could be quite market friendly. So that may be the first scenario that I would point to. Start preparing for that. The second is the 3D sweep, right? House, Senate, and White House. Fourth, that you have Democrat House, Democrat Senate, and Trump reelected. And guys, I don't mean to be shocking. That would be the worst of all outcomes, because if you have a Democratic House and Democratic Senate, they'll impeach him in the first 6 months. They'll go back and impeach him again. Okay. And they'll succeed this time.
Okay. Frank, thank you very much for the debate. It was really, really helpful for all of us, I think. And I guess we're going to have to keep in touch and listen to your market calls every week from here until the end of the year.
Well, Marcelo, thank you. Igor, thank you so much. If I can be helpful to any of you in any way, individually, I'll be happy to jump on calls. This is going to be a very confusing, and I don't try and make light of it, but it's going to be a very confusing next 2 to 3 months, I predict. And if we can be helpful in any way, DWS, just to try and figure this out, the politics of it, just let us know.
Thank you. Igor, thank you very much. Off to you.
Thank you.
Igor, you're muted.
Sorry. Okay. Okay.
You do it again.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. No, I was speaking to myself. Sorry. Common these days in Zoom. I was saying, what a fantastic session. Indeed, we are facing very complex and challenging times ahead of us. But as we all know, where there is uncertainty, there is also opportunity. So many, many thanks for your insights today. Once again, on behalf of FLAR and me personally, I would like to extend our deepest gratitude to our guest today, Frank Kelly from DWS, and to our host today, Marcelo Martinelli from the Central Bank of Brazil. Many, many thanks for your insights today. I am very certain that they will greatly contribute and add great value to the investment of public resources of our institutions. Also, I would like to very specially thank all of you, our audience today, for accompanying us once again. About our next sessions, we are preparing a very special event for the coming months. So we'll be keeping you posted. Please stay tuned. We hope that you can accompany us once again. Until then, so long, stay safe in peace. Hasta la vista, amigos.